Om Swastiastu. Hello everyone, welcome back with me. Now I will present some material about the miracle of living. Before that, let me introduce myself. My name is KADEK Okta WidIADNYANA, name 2011 17 10 11, and I'm from PBE 4A BANGLI. Okay, in these slides, tables of contents of materials, the miracles of language. The first, acquisitions and learning. The twins, the contributions of behaviors. And the third, language learning will take care of itself. And the fourth, focus on form or focus on forms. And the fifth, making sense of it all. Okay, and next. Okay, now I want to explain about the points of material, the miracle of links. Okay, and starts unless there is something wrong with the medley or high school, all children acquire a language as the devil. Indeed, many children around the world acquire more than one language and by the age of 6 or 7 are speaking as confident be or trilingual. The questions that language teachers want to be answered, therefore, is whether second language acquisitions, that is language learning in the classroom, can hope to replicate the conditions in which children acquire their first language. For example, if we consider the language exposure that children receive, we find that it is a special kind of language. Despite the fact then that there is something special and unique, but the first language acquisitions consists of many theories and methodologies has been to try to see how, if at one, we can replicate the success of that kind of language acquisitions in the language learning classroom. Okay, I'm next the submaterial of the miracle of language. The first, acquisitions and learning. Of the two situations, picking up a language simply absorbing it by, for example, living a target language community with no formal attention to language study. It would appear closer to first language acquisitions than studying a language in a classroom. The distinctions between subconscious acquisitions and conscious learning is still of concern. In the early 1980s, the American linguist Stephen Carson put forward what he called the input hypothesis. In Carson's view, therefore, acquire language and learn language is different both in character and effect. Okay, this acquisitions learning hypothesis by Crescent. Example for situations in which acquisitions typically takes place are simple everyday life situations like conversing, reading a book, listening to radio, or watching TV, while learning takes place consciously as an untreated process with the deliberate aim of gaining language knowledge. So, reading a book mentions a crescent as a typical acquisition process can also be a learning process if it happens with the intentions of learning the particular language. The logical corresponding to the conscious starting of knowledge is of course the unconscious or subconscious representations of acquired knowledge, the implicit or procedural knowledge. Learned knowledge, on the other hand, has to be reached consciously, meaning the performer has to contemplate first which of his consciously requisites knowledge he might need for the forthcoming situations. Questions show the sexual acquisitions by students of a second language as being born up with the nature of the language input they receive. This input is rudely tuned, rather our parental language is substantially moderated as we saw above, and is a stark contrast the, to the finely tuned input of math language instructions, where specific graded language has been chosen for synthesis learning. Okay, and next, the twins submaterial, the contributions of behaviors. Anyone who has ever studied a language knows that listen based exclusively on the acquisitions view of language described above are extremely rare. The point here is that a consensus on the form rather than substantious acquisitions was considered to be advantageous. This is the very antithesis of a purely acquisition-based view of second language learning. However, the direct method, which believes essentially in a one-to-one correspondence between input and output, really got going when it was married to the theory of behaviors. Despite its age, Watson and Reynolds' experiments is of world dense academic interest because the conditioning it demonstrates and the way that such research, the conditioning led to theory of behaviors had a profound effect on the teaching of all kinds. In a book called Verbal Behavior, the Hieroglyphs, Bernard Skinner suggests that much the same process happens in language learning, especially first language learning. In language learning, a behaviorist sense is evident when students are asked to repeat sentences correctly and are rewarded for such correctness by teacher, prize, or some other benefit. Okay, the next submaterial, third submaterial, language learning will take care of itself. A major issue in language learning theory has been whether traditional techniques normally associated with language teaching, drills, repetitions, counterleads, practice of specific language items, and etc. actually have any beneficial effect. The hypothesis the word working on was in Orwell's word that if the language teacher management activities are directed exclusively at anything they learn in solving communications problems in the target language, then language learning will take care of itself. From R. Ulrichs, 1979. Much of the problem in discussing acquisitions and learning occurs when the discussions in differs from the age of students, the level they are, their motivation, their educational culture, and the place in which the learning is taking place. In other words, it seems to be satisfying. We learn to do something by doing it. And if the goal of the language is communication, that communicating as we learn is the best way to go about it. Okay, the fourth submaterial focus on form or focus on forms. In this context, a distinction has been made between a focus on form and focus on forms, as Ron sees, which largely only precedes by the argument that focus on form in general is more effective than a focus on forms. Explains an underlying assumption to focus on form approach is that all classroom activities need to be based on communicative tasks and that any treatment of grammar should arise from difficulties in communicating any desired meaning. An explanation from other sources pertaining this are as follows. Focus on form. Drawing a student's attention to linguistic elements as they are needed and to meaningful communications which has high priority. Focus on forms, a kind of skill learning approach which is only concerned with discrete grammatical points. Okay, next, the fifth submaterial and the last submaterial, making sense of it all. Okay, the first, if we were attracted by the nations of language conditioning that letting language learning take care of itself would make no sense. Okay, the second, if we were convinced by argument for a focus on form, then focusing on discrete language forms in a syllabus would not be right thing to do. It made making efforts to retrieve and then use all and any of the language with like a switch that takes language from the lens to the acquired stores. Ellis 1982. And the third, it is possible that some language is remembered as a result of repetitious practice, or at least that this practice leads to significant nothings, and that rewards such as success or teacher approval may help students to remember in this way. Okay, everyone, that's all from me about the presentations. Thank you for attention, and I close the presentations with Parmasanti. Om Santi Santi Santi. Thank you, everyone. See you.